Hey there, we're going to continue unpacking our Knowing God module by talking about Sabbath. Now, this may be a concept that's somewhat unfamiliar to some of us. I want to start by saying that, Western cultures generally, we generally define success materially. Work hard, you earn more. This mentality actually bleeds over into every area of our life and places a very high valuation on human effort. And, which our country and our culture has been very successful because of this. Many great things have happened because of this work ethic, and in and of itself, there's nothing wrong with working hard. But this philosophy also carries with it some problems, and that is that we tend to overestimate our own efforts, and it's hard to put work down because it won't get done if I don't do it. Maybe it's kind of the mentality that we have. We tend to develop a propensity to work compulsively to the point that we waste no space in our lives. We fill every single minute with activity, and our schedules are just jam-packed. If you're a parent, we tend to pass along this dysfunction to our children, involving them in every kind of sport and activity we can find because we don't want them to, quote-unquote, miss out on anything. And we pass along this hurriedness, this busyness to the next generation. And so what ends up happening, I've seen this many times through the years, is that through this busyness and this focus on activity, that even worship and rest get relegated to the margins of life, and it becomes something that we do when it works out, but it's not something that we do deliberately or with a spirit of submission to God. And so I think, honestly, Sabbath was God's gift to mankind and to Israel specifically as we read the Old Testament, but I think to all of us. It's the gift of repetitive rest. As we see this practice in the Old Testament, it was every week for 24 hours. They would stop and they would do no work. Even there was every 7 years there was a Sabbath rest, and every seven years there was a big year of Jubilee where everybody they'd let their land rest for an entire year. This rhythm of rest was built in to the way that God asked His people to live. And so it's this regular time of rest and delighting in God. It's a time for just being in the midst of a life of doing. Let me read a couple scriptures and kind of unpack this for just a moment with us, and then I'm going to offer you a few suggestions that you can talk about together with your group tonight. In Exodus chapter 20 and verse 8, this is where we find sort of the law, the Mosaic law regulations, if you will, the Ten Commandments. And it says in verse 8, it says, remember the Sabbath day by keeping it holy. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but on the seventh day it's a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you nor your son or daughter or your male or female servant or your animals, nor any foreigner residing in your towns. For in 6 days the Lord made the heavens and the earth, the sea, and all that is in them, but He rested on the seventh day. Therefore God blessed the Sabbath day and made it holy. And so we read this passage in the Ten Commandments. He lays it out. God says, look, I want you guys to stop. I want you to take a minute. I want you to take 1 day of rest at the end of the week. You work hard for 6 days, but take a day off, and I want you to rest. Even God Himself, He says, took His rest after creating the heavens and the earth. Ezekiel 20, as you fast forward in time, Ezekiel was written in a time when Israel's already, they've messed up a lot, and they're off in exile in Babylon. And he writes in chapter 20, the prophet Ezekiel writes in chapter 20, verse 12, as he's talking to the people and prophesying to them from God, he says, also, I gave them my Sabbaths as a sign between us, so they would know that I, the Lord, made them holy. So Ezekiel's pointing out some of their issues, and he says, look, God gave us the Sabbath as a sign between us. And, I honestly was raised in a culture where Sabbath, it was like, well, that was for the Israelites. That was kind of Old Testament. All the other nine commandments, they apply to me, but not that that's the one that doesn't. We can throw that one out. It no longer applies. Says who? right? I think God gave that to us for a reason, not in some kind of a strictly Pharisaical way, but really we need that time of rest. It was a big deal in the Old Testament. In fact, God was very upset that they profaned, as he would say, they profaned the Sabbath and did not keep it holy and did work on those days. And it's important to note that the Sabbath predates the law. In fact, the law itself refers to the original idea of a Sabbath. Genesis chapter 2 says that after completing the heavens, creating the heavens and the earth on the seventh day, God rested and finished his work. And it says that he blessed that day, made it holy, because on it he rested from all the work of creating that he had done. So God himself, as in everything, God goes ahead of us and sets us the example that we should have this rhythm of rest and recharging in our lives. If you fast forward into the New Testament, Sabbath is even a metaphor for our future life in the kingdom with God. It says in chapter 4 of Hebrews in verse 1, "Therefore, since the promise of entering his rest still stands, let us be careful that none of you be found to have fallen short of it." He says, look, we all have this rest coming. Like in the big picture, there's a rest coming for us. And in verse 9, he says, "There remains then a Sabbath rest for the people of God. For anyone who enters God's rest also rests from their works, just as God did from his. Let us therefore make every effort to enter that rest so that no one will perish by following their example of disobedience." So here, obviously, he's talking about foreshadowing heaven and our time with God for eternity, and saying that we have that to look forward to. And so we should, obviously, hang on to our faith. But he's using Sabbath. Even the concept of Sabbath is metaphorical in terms of illustrating to us what heaven is going to be. And so the Israelites figured this out after the debacle of the exile. And so from the time of their return to Israel until the day of Jesus, they got super excited about keeping the Sabbath. And so then they kind of went the other direction. So from the time of the restoration of the temple during Ezra's time to the time of Jesus, they developed two different treatises in the Talmud, which is basically interpretations of the law. And those two sections were devoted to the details of Sabbath observation. So we want to make sure we don't mess it up. So here's how you do it. And they created two whole giant lists of things that you could and couldn't do. And there was, even in one of them, there was 39 classes of prohibitions, things that you could not do. They got uber crazy serious about the Sabbath, to the point that when Jesus talks about Sabbath, he's not really talking about it in terms of whether we should or shouldn't do it. He's addressing the fact that they had so overthought Sabbath that they created all these rules and regulations that they had missed the entire point of it. And so it says in Mark chapter 2, Jesus says one Sabbath he was going through the grain fields, and as his disciples walked along, they began to pick some heads of grain. The Pharisees said to him, "Look, why are they doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath?" He answered, "Have you never read what David did when he and his companions were hungry and in need? In the days of Abiathar the high priest, he entered the house of God and ate the consecrated bread, which is lawful only for priests to eat. And he also gave some to his companions. Then he said to them, the Sabbath was made for man, not man for the Sabbath. So the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." So what Jesus says, look, you guys are getting so caught up in all these rules, you've forgotten the principle and the reason why we Sabbath in the first place. He says the Sabbath was made for man. It was made for you. We weren't made the Sabbath wasn't made so that we could then, fall down before it and worship it and create all these rules. It's the other way around. God created it to serve us. He needed rest after creating, and he knows that we also need this kind of rest. So why is Sabbath important? So that's like, wow, an embarrassingly short overview of Sabbath from the Old Testament and in the Bible in general. Why is it important to us? Well, first of all, I think that Sabbath, the practice of Sabbath, frees us from the addiction to busyness. We are a busy people, as I said in the beginning. We fill our lives with so much activity. And it takes discipline to actually stop and to say, I am going to take some time every week to just be and not have a plan, not have a schedule, not have 18 things that I'm trying to do. we are addicted to activity, and it is not good for us. And Sabbath addresses this. It frees us from that addiction. I think secondly, it acknowledges our own human limitations. Some of us, myself included, tend to feel like I feel like at least I have to cram every minute of every day with some kind of productive activity, even on days I'm supposedly resting. And what that is really it's a supreme sort of selfish view or an overstatement perhaps of my own abilities, my own importance. And it's good for me to stop and say, you know what? Whatever it was that needed to be done can wait, because it's not about me. I need to give this time to God. And so there's this acknowledgement of human limitations. We cannot do everything. God doesn't expect us to do everything. He didn't create us to do everything. We need that rest. And so Sabbath reminds us of that. It also honors God. He created it for us. He created it to serve us. He asked us to take the time to rest. And in that time, we are to honor God and take that space to not just sleep, although that may be something we want to do, but also it's time for us to relax in God and rejoice in His presence. And the last thing I think Sabbath does for us is that it helps us to trust God. Because by not working one day and taking a day where we say, I'm going to stop this activity, because there's plenty of things that need to be done, and if we don't do them, the fear is, well, they won't get done. The fear is that, well, somehow this is going to look bad on me, or whatever the case is. And we're not trusting God. We're putting all of our trust in our own human efforts. And so by taking Sabbath once a week where we say, I'm putting everything aside, we're forcing ourselves, in a sense, to trust God that it'll be okay. But I am going to honor Him by taking this time to rest. So how shall we practice Sabbath? Well, here's a few suggestions, and then I'll leave you with some questions to discuss. I would encourage us all to think about this deeply and set aside a 24-hour period of time every week where for connecting with God and others. I know many of our forefathers or whatnot, they tended to set aside Sunday as a day, although the Jews set aside Saturday. In our culture, in America especially, Sunday was often looked that way. People would get up, you'd rest, you'd go to church, you'd worship, you would spend the day with the family. But a 24-hour period, whatever period that is for you, I know some of us have different types of jobs that require different days of work and things of that nature, but finding a 24-hour period where it's a time we disconnect from all the things that have to be done, and that we just enjoy time with God, with our family, with friends, and that we just rest in God, that we rest in Him. That's it. And choose activities. Choose activities that are restful for you. I know many of us, we have different things that are restful. Maybe taking a walk, or having a picnic with your family, or reading a book, taking a nap, spending extra time in prayer and Bible study, coming to church. I mean, these are things that we can do in practicing Sabbath and just resting in God. The other thing we can do as we practice Sabbath is to let go of the things that stress you out. Leave them behind. That's not a day for that. Put those things down, put those things behind us, and just rest in God. There's so much more that can be said about Sabbath, and in this short little video, I just want to kick the idea out to us as a spiritual practice, as a rhythm for our spiritual lives. And I feel like this is something that I think is very important for every single one of us to learn to practice as we grow in our walk with God. And so I'm going to leave you with some questions here for you to discuss amongst yourselves as you think about the practice of Sabbath. I'll put them on the screen, and at this point you can pause the video and take the time to discuss those amongst yourselves.